Okay.
Getting complicated on you now.
Okay, clip it to the belt.
On the side.
Right, just clip it right down. Okay.
Good. Now you have an on-off switch. It can be like the.
Put it on.
Right.
I don't touch the damn thing.
And
We just talked with Dr. COVID. I don't like electronic gadgets anymore.
Good. And I'm just going to loop this through here.
All right.
Okay. Now what we've done here is we've lit an area at the podium. Well, we're going to get a nice shot if you stay in that area. Do you like to roam around a lot when you talk?
No,
or?
I'll talk right down there.
Great. So this microphone is going to be for our tape. That microphone there is going to feed the PA system in the house.
Good.
We have you covered.
Wonderful. I hope it all
Thank
works.
you.
Good luck. If it works, you're the only guy where I speak what works. They usually fit. Hello. Right. Let me say hello to someone. Those look all like senior fellows. I'm Gerhard Neumann.
Introducing a speaker under these occasions to describe in great detail his past. It's also customary to describe in great detail Lester Gardner's past. Let me simply say that Lester Gardner was the founder of Aviation Week and has in fact left us a legacy to have these lectures. Since all of the relevant information is in fact contained in this folder, which I believe has been passed out to everyone, I think rather than take any more time, I'll be quiet and let you hear the person that you came here to hear, Gerhard Neumann. Mr. Neumann?
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me congratulate you first for having a boss who gives the finest introduction I've ever had, and I've been speaking for many years. Thank you very much for being so brief. Now, you read, as your chairman said, this fine description of mine here, and I would like to brag on one point. What is not contained is that I, 2 years ago, got into the National Aviation Hall of Fame, which is a pretty rare thing because I saw von Oheim spoke here 2 years or 2 speeches ago, and he did not get it, and that's the only thing. Okay, I'm glad to see so many of you interested in a different type of engineering. So, in order not to screw you up completely with what I really want to teach you, or what I want to tell you, so that you learn something from that speech, I will begin in front in Germany. I was born there, which you saw in the little book. And before you can be admitted, or could be admitted, I don't know what it is now, into an engineering school in Germany, you had, it was mandatory, to spend not 2 years, but 3 years of an apprenticeship. Apprenticeship without pay. Now, I reintroduced, and I will jump back and forth several times in my talk today, I reintroduced in General Electric once I got in charge of thousands of people and ran the whole jet engine business. I reintroduced the apprentice system because I felt it was mandatory. And you will hear later as we go along on my background and what I learned. I think it's mandatory that you students, young men going to college, before going to college, before going to MIT, get your hands dirty and get a feel for bolts, nuts, tools, and everything. You must get a feel for it. And now let me ask you a question first. How many of you have worked on your car? I assume each of you has a car, if not a grandparent. Just raise your hand. How many of you? Okay, good. How many have gone down deeper than spark plugs? Oh boy, well that's better. I'm surprised about that. I'm very glad to hear that. Because I spoke in Caltech and in some other places out of the West Coast, where a lot of boys said, yes, we're working on our cars. How deep have you gone below spark plugs? There was just a small number. When I was your age, at that time in Germany, one person had a car out of 53 people. I mean, very few cars. But we heard stories about America, that all American kids have Model A Fords. That was that age. and that they just turn that car over sideways and take the oil pan off and start working on the bearings and crankshafts and piston rings and valves and all about it. And we were very jealous of the American kids who had this opportunity. Now today, I don't think many of you have looked in the oil pan and taken the oil pan off your car and so on. Anyhow, you had to be an apprentice, and actually the book is correctly, or your prospect here, that 2 years were mandatory. But 3 years was practically mandatory because after 3 years you became a journeyman. In Germany, you were not permitted to work without supervision on any car, whether brakes or steering or engine, what it is, unless you are a certified journeyman. And a journeyman is a guy who had bloody fingernails, some bloody knuckles, and everything busted, and had a good taste of what goes and what doesn't go. I went to school. I graduated from a very small school, total 650 students, total capacity, the oldest in Germany, but Mr. Heinkel of Heinkel Aircraft, Mr. Junkers of Junkers Aircraft, very many famous people and successful people graduated from that school. Now here comes one little lesson. The fact that you are an MIT graduate, or going to be, I think is wonderful. And you will have no trouble getting probably the finest jobs anywhere. What you do with them is another matter. And I don't know if you have a system of asking people, keeping a record of it, and what happens 10 years later, and have a questionnaire sent to them in the old address and say, what happened to you in 10 years after you graduated? And then you can find out whether all the things you're being taught are really useful and practical and necessary. Well, I graduated, and just before graduation I read on a bulletin board a little notice saying that 12 young engineers are wanted in China, nationalist China. That time was no communist China, but it was up in the hills. Nationalist China to maintain German military equipment. That was 1938, the end of 38, to go over there in 39. Now you may wonder if your history is any good. And you elderly gentlemen, I'm sure, remember very well the Hitler-Hirohito Mussolini Axis party. That while Hitler was officially an ally of the Japanese, they loved the Chinese. Germany and China were allies in World War I, and Germany shipped secretly the latest war equipment to nationalist China to fight the Japanese. Now that you never heard before. Anyone here heard it before? No. Okay. So that was a thing. I wound up in Hong Kong. And it was an exciting trip to Hong Kong because in 1939, there was a once-a-week flight from Europe to China. One flight a week. It took 8 days in the same plane, fully loaded. 4 crew members, pilot, co-pilot, engineer, and navigator, and 12 passengers. That's all it had. Big tri-motor French Devotin. Flying every 2.5 hours, we had to make a landing in another country. Over North Africa. I've never seen a camel before. You Americans have seen this in television, all this brings you up to date. But in those days, 1939, I had never seen a camel, I had never seen a black person. I've never seen a North African, and we went along down to Egypt, from Egypt to Iraq, and Lebanon in Baghdad, and Baghdad across India, and Thailand, and Burma, and Indochina, which was French in those days, and finally Hong Kong. And I reported in Hong Kong to that Chinese outfit, which was a secret outfit to gather us young engineers and take us into the interior of China. Now, how many of you have been to Hong Kong? Okay. You've seen Hong Kong skyscrapers full of people, 4, 5, 6 million people in there now. When I was there were 150,000 people in Hong Kong, of whom 25,000 were British troops. It was a very small town with one high-rise building of 20 stories. Today it's a skyscraper, one next to the other one. This organization, the Chinese Nationalist Organization, which was supposed to receive us and take us into the interior, had disappeared a few days before. per request of the Japanese, who have found out that there are Germans on the way to China to help the Chinese against them. They put the pressure on the British caved in, threw the Chinese out, and here I was sitting there together with some of my associates in the finest hotel with absolutely no money, which was supposed to be paid. Now I could tell you a story, an hour about that, but this is not as the MIT subject, unfortunately. I went into the interior. First, the war started, and I became prisoner of war of the British, and there were a total of 102 Germans. Most of them were residents in Hong Kong, representing Mercedes-Benz, Leica cameras, various steam engines, and industrial concerns. We were all interned in Hong Kong, and in 1940, when Germany made a big push after having beaten Poland in 1939, on France, Belgium, Holland, Denmark, and you may recall that, you gentlemen, in June of 1940, things got very tough in our camp, and we were given 48 hours to, quote, get the hell out of here, or be interned in Colombo, in Ceylon, in India. Because up to that time, we were still being treated a little kind of gentlemen, because the Chinese in those days looked through the barbed wire inside and they couldn't see one white man mistreating the other white man. That was, in those days in China, a very impossible thing. Well, by an absolute coincidence, and I want to just mention this one, the 48 hours were nearly up. We were each given a British soldier with a fixed bayonet as escort. We had to pay for him, 5 Hong Kong dollars a day. Took us around wherever we wanted to. We wound up at the Portuguese consulate, an American consulate, and wherever possibility was, and only a few of us really tried. I ran in the elevator in the only high-rise building as I asked for the manager of the China National Aviation Corporation. He wasn't in. I say, come back next Monday. I say, well, it's too late. I can't do it anymore. I was ready to go back to camp and get out when I got the elevator coming up. And as I walk in with my guard, the door opened and a gentleman came out. Tie loose. Couldn't be British. The tie was loose. The jacket off, hanging over his shoulder. Matter of fact, I'm going to take it off right now. Okay, if you don't mind. Excuse me, please. And this gentleman looked at me and looked at that soldier and said, what's going on here? This gentleman happened to be a Mr. Bond. Now, many of you will remember Bond. I know Pratt & Whitney remembers Bond for sure. Bond's son was the head of the FAA here just a year ago. But Bond was a vice president of Pan American Airways, directing the traffic San Francisco to Manila. And now they put an extension on Manila, Hong Kong. And he was just there, and he saw me, and then he heard my story. I couldn't speak English. My wife said I still can't speak well, but at least I can be understood, I hope. And those days it was very difficult for me to speak English, and the guy took the time, grabbed the phone, said, sit down, dialed, not dialed, well, I had some number, there was no dial, and said after a while, I only heard a little bit to the soldier, get the man at 11 o'clock to Kai Tak. Kai Tak is the airport in Hong Kong. Not anymore as it is now. Now it's a long jet runway, but in those days it was a grass runway, a little bit of a strip. Get him there, 11 o'clock tonight, or don't worry about him any longer. The worry was, of course, the British had taken my passport away before going. So that guy took me without a passport in the interior of China, dropped me there, but had written me a little card to Claire Lee Chenoit. Now, I want to get an honest hand raising of you folks, of the young folks. Have you ever heard about Claire Lee Chenoit? Who has heard? Okay, well, amazing. I spoke in some other place again, Chenoit who? They had no idea who Chenoit was. Chenoit was a captain, retired from the U.S. Army Air Corps, was hired by Madame Chiang Kai-shek, sent to Chongqing to organize the Chinese Air Force. This man in the elevator, whom I didn't see for many, many years, but I did see him later, and he just passed away a couple of years ago. He had written me a card to this Captain Chenoit and said, hey, take a look at that man. Well, Chenoit took a look at that man and said, you're an engineer, and you're probably quite capable, but I can't use you now. I could use you less than a year from now. So if you go over to that automobile place, Renault trucks, there are no passenger cars over there, Renault diesel trucks, you can help China a hell of a lot in that time. Okay, goodbye. I went over to Renault, and I learned a lot of lessons which you should learn. There was a Burma Road. You heard about the Burma Road. It wasn't finished yet, had been built up between China, Kunming, and western Yunnan, of lower corner of China, and Burma. The only communication which would be there except one railroad line from Indochina. And the danger was already that time the Japanese would occupy Indochina, and if they stopped the railroad, China would be cut off because the Himalayas are in between. The Burma Road goes in between the Himalayan mountains to Burma. So this man in charge, happened to be a German, at the French Renault Diesel, immediately said, would you like to take a convoy down the Burma Road? We bring tungsten and other valuable material which they didn't have in the United States down, and we bring bombs and ammunition and gasoline up the Burma Road. The trucks were 4-cylinder diesel trucks. And they were so overloaded that the springs, a set of leaf springs in the car, were completely flat, and the wooden blocks were put between the chassis and the axle because the spring had absolutely no effect anymore. It was just flattened out. Well, the territory, like Kunming, where we started, is 6,000 feet high. And from there we climbed to 9,000 feet. And then we went down again, driving a convoy, leading a convoy, all Chinese in there, Chinese drivers, Chinese co-drivers. The first thing we did, we knocked the doors out. We took the doors out, took the windows out, so that you could jump out in case you had to jump out. Now, I don't want to give you a long story on the Burma Road, but I want to tell you that at one point, we had a bearing problem. One connecting rod started hammering away inside an engine, and I crawled underneath it. The whole convoy stopped. It was so narrow, no other convoy could pass. There was no other convoy. We had only one convoy down and one convoy going up. Took the oil pan off, looked at it, and I saw the metal already molten down there, and there was a bearing rattling around in there. Now, where the heck you get the bearing? You wouldn't even get the bearing in the United States. I wonder if they could get it in France. Certainly not on the Burma Road somewhere in the middle of nowhere. What to do? A Chinese boy, a bright idea. He said, mister, and he spoke a little Chinese, a little English, and I spoke a little Chinese by that time. Here's my hat. I said, what are we going to do with the hat? He said, cut it. And we cut a strip of felt and wrapped it around, per his suggestion, around the bearing, put the bearing together. That thing was running up and down the Burma Road with that hat in there. Okay, here you chief engineers and all experts on everything, you'll see that some very good idea of a non-educated Chinese boy who just had a good feel for the situation. Could cut the hat, put it around, and off it went. The next problem I had was a village was up on top of one of the high points, and we stopped there overnight to eat and to sleep on a bamboo cot. And next morning I couldn't start the engines. Altitude was too high. So what to do now? You learn another thing. You begin to learn all kinds of things without going to MIT or a German engineering school or somewhere. I learned from then on. One engine we got started, luckily, who then pulled every truck till it got down, and then let it roll down, gain speed, and start the engine. All right, so this is my experience on the Burma Road, and I could tell you a hell of a lot more of what's going on there. Then came the day when my neighbor, in those days we didn't live in a Chinese town, we had foreigners had to live outside in a very modern little village in Kunming. My neighbor was Chenault, and he grabbed me in the morning on December the 8th, 1941. I was just going over to a place where I had started a garage of my own. The Chinese had never seen a white man really work in a garage. Now, there are many cars. The governor had a car, his wife had a car, his concubines, he had 3 of them, had cars. The police chief had a car, the military, and a couple of bankers and the foreign embassies. They all came to Newman's garage. It got bigger and bigger. I got to hire one man, another man, another man. Finally, I had 24 men. And I have photographs of it. And I visited that garage a couple years ago. We were in China. It is still there. And there now you repair cars. What do you do? We needed a spring leaf. You know, the springs. One big one and a little shorter one, a little shorter one, a little shorter one. That's a set of springs for the British ambassador. We couldn't get a spring leaf, but we had a round iron rod, a long rod, And I had a Chinese, tall, 6-foot something blacksmith who had a little 5-foot something wife. Big busted, little baby, all there, nursing right along the line. That's what all standard down there, standard procedure. And she operated a hand pump to get the fire going. Charcoal fire in a 50 gasoline barrel, have that thing heated, and he took that rod and heated that rod, just a section, about a foot of it. And then he said, okay, now, and she took the baby, dumped it down in a corner, grabbed the sledgehammer, and with a round swing, and I mean a round swing was prohibited in Germany. I don't know how it is here in America. I don't even know how it's in England. But there was a round swing was dangerous. The hammer could fly away down there, but she swung, and they hammered piece by piece. Heat it again, another section, a leaf out of it, curled the eyes, and we had the spring, except it wasn't hardened. Now, how are we going to harden the spring? We had no idea what the degree of hardness should be or what it should be, but we were all told to do our little business in this trough. And the trough was full with urine. The guy heated the whole spring and then dumped it in. A little bit, a little more, a little more, and dumped the whole thing and said, okay. Believe it or not, that spring was running throughout when I was in Kunming until I joined the Flying Tigers. It was running all right. And there are many, many examples I can give you how you can help yourself with some ingenuity, with some feel for the situation. The man had no theory, no theoretical knowledge. The man said he just did it. Okay, I joined the Flying Tigers, P-40 Curtiss Commandos. Now, P-40s were in a 1937 plane. Our position was Japanese 0. We had a lot of bombers overhead. We had Zeros overhead who had bombed before the Flying Tigers arrived, the city and the electric works and whatever we had there that tried to hit my garage too. Well, here was the first example of me learning American technique. I got a handbook of an Allison engine, 1,050 horsepower, driving a 3-bladed propeller. And the Curtiss ride was an old plane, but it was a solid plane, armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, 2 30-caliber machine guns firing through the propeller hub, 4 50 calibers in the wings. So that was the initial plane we had. There were 100 of them shipped to China. Now, I tell you one thing which you won't believe, and you never heard, Professor. Did you know that the United States had planned a preemptive strike on Japan prior to Pearl Harbor? All right? Clarice is my wife's name down there. I have that folder, this page of the newspaper in the book, which is a new book is out, which gives the fact that the United States, knowing the Japanese would have to attack the United States, because they were completely, they had no more fuel, we boycotted them with iron, we boycotted them with steel, we did many things to them, we caused them to do it, they would probably would have done it anyhow. I don't want to defend the Japanese one down bit, but we knew an attack was going to come, not necessarily all the way down in Hawaii. We thought Guam or Kwajalein or some of these places would get hit. Not all the way get an aircraft carrier down in a long range getting Japanese planes hitting Hawaii. We had planned several months earlier, and the Flying Tigers were the fighter squadrons, 3 of them, which were sent over already in anticipation of 3 more squadrons of bomber squadrons who were stuck in Australia for some red tape reason when the war started. So the United States had planned to hit Japan before Japan could hit us in Hawaii. And that is a fact. You look as if you don't believe it. Well, I hope you get the book down there. My wife up there later has the name of the book down there, which is, I say, just came out. And what's the name of it? She's sleeping. Okay. All right, here we go. Here we were P-40s with a V engine, 12 cylinders. Spark plugs inside, spark plugs from both sides on the bank, spark plugs on the outside. Pretty good machines, very heavy. The whole plane weighed 8,000 pounds, had 1,000 horsepower to drive it. And we have a propeller governor. Now, I don't know if you know what a propeller governor is. A propeller has not only blades, but they rotate. Not only this way, of course, but they rotate on takeoff a different angle and when they cruise or when they climb. So they're just a few degrees of rotation through a governor. The governor is a gadget which is held on by 4 nuts against 4 studs built into the V. And I have lesson 1 for you here. When you design something which you think is practical later, you better think of how it's going to be used and talk to people who use it and not just sit in an air-conditioned office, as you're going to have here, understand? And thinking of a nice engine hanging on a crane and maybe even going to working on that engine or looking at that engine. This engine is hot as hell when it comes back from a mission. And the pilot says, hey, I got a propeller governor problem. Quickly fix it. There are Japs on the way already, 20 minutes following us later. You had to get in there, take 4 nuts loose, get a new governor on, quickly put it together, get that plane ready to fly again, or the subject being bombed or being strafed. No idea what practicality meant. They installed that nice governor when it's nice and cool and good hand light and give me a little light here and a little more this way. You can't have that in an airplane installed sitting on a military runway there in China somewhere. And it was useless. Now I'll tell you another one, which is the same style. The P-40, which is that airplane I talked about, had, of course, a tail wheel, like all these planes in those days had. Nearly all the planes. So when it took off, it gained speed, and as it gained speed, it lifted its tail till it was horizontal. Gained more speed till it had 95, 100 miles an hour, and then it could lift up and take off. They had a lot of gravel in China and sand because we had no asphalt runways. There was no asphalt. That didn't exist in China. All the runways had been built was 10,000 women, and I'm not exaggerating. Over 10,000, chopping away on stones, make them smaller, and have a real fine layer on top. And then there were 200 men on a big V pulling a stone roller over the runway down there to press it down. But the problem was there was still a little gravel left. And that gravel, well, I skipped one plane now. Let's go through once more the P-40, the inlet. As a plane got up, because of the dirt, they had installed filters on the side of the inlet of the engine. And the aerodynamics of that filter, which was sucking air into the engine, worked real fine at first on the ground. But as the plane gained speed and the tail got up, suddenly the airfoil, the airstream broke, and it went back in the rear, and the engine immediately suffered and couldn't get enough pressure. Enough takeoff down there. Can you follow that? I don't know if I made that clear enough. But all I want to tell you is that great ideas can be done, can be had, can be executed on the ground. Everybody thinks it's fine. They ran the engine on the ground. Oh, it works beautiful. Now we have a filter. Now we keep the little gravel out. And what happened later? The airplane couldn't even take off. We lost many an airplane later which could not get enough power in the available runway taken off with that down filter in. Till I, as a master sergeant, I could never get a commission being an enemy alien. At that point, I was still an enemy alien. Said and put out an order signed by General Chenault, no more use of filters. Leave the filters out and let the engine wear out if you have to, but at least take off that plane, take off for runway. Now came the other thing I was going to mention before. Then, 2 years later, we got more modern planes. North American P-51s, streamlined, ready for the war, more power, British engines in there, Rolls-Royce engines. Congratulations. Where's the British gentleman here just now here? See, is that on there? Okay. Congratulations. A hell of a good engine down there. 2-stage supercharger. We loved it. Except you had a different, you had a different ignition system on the right side than the left side. Now that was more complicated, but you and I can have a talk about that later. But anyhow, there was that P-51, streamlined as could be, long range, with a inlet, air inlet, not anymore on the side or in front, but behind the pilot, below the pilot seat was the inlet. And again, the same misery existed. The propeller shoved and threw a little bit of rocks into the inlet, which was uneasy plane. Now, in Europe, that wouldn't happen. In America, that wouldn't happen. You had a smooth runway, they could sweep it, and they had people hand sweep it, and prisoners do it, and so on. But in China, it was impossible. And the only way to fix all the leaks, which then resulted later from underneath the aircraft there, hit by little rocks, was when I came through on Thanksgiving Day 1943, we made a very great surprise raid on the Japanese, or long range. They didn't know the P-51s had come. We didn't know either till the night before. And I bought some from the Chinese, some bicycles. I put bicycle spokes into it, put little nuts on the other side, and at least they could fly the mission. It was one of the most successful missions we ever had. 64 enemy aircraft destroyed and not a single loss in anything. That was a good deal. Okay, one more thing about China. I was just about 4 months in the regular U.S. Army Air Corps, not anymore the Flying Tigers. They were discontinued in 42 per contract. And I stayed in per special permission of Secretary of War Stinson. Gave General Chenoid permission, he became a general in the meantime, to keep me in the military. And I was very proud of it. I got paid not only Master Sergeant pay, I got overseas pay, I got flying pay. It was just a great entertainment for me, the whole thing. When a few months after this happened, Chenoid had me called in his office and said, "Neumann, I got a job for you." I said, "Well, I'm busy as can be," and he could see my black hands and all the covers, and said, "I need a Japanese Zero flown by American pilots. We got to put a Zero together and find out what the darn thing does. It flies higher than we do by several thousand feet. It flies faster by 50 miles per hour. It flies further by 1,000 miles distance further. It does many, many things we have never thought the Japanese were able to do. We only knew of Japanese toys which break and rust, you know, you old folks will remember that. But nothing that they built an aircraft which was absolutely superior to anything the Germans built at that time. Even the Spitfire, I hate to say, at that point. The Zero was superior at that particular point. If you can afford what they thought they could afford but couldn't afford, namely the loss of a pilot ever so often. The reason why the Zero was so good was, A, I found out after I put the first Jap Zero together from shot down pieces. That was done in February 1943. I was finished with it. I got sick as hell in the process, but anyhow, the plane was brought over to India. I went with it, and I got orders from General Arnold to take the plane apart and ship it to the United States, and then go back over to the United States and put it together again and sell war bonds over there. But this was done after American pilots flew the Zero against other American planes flown by American pilots to find out what fighting technique could we use with that superior plane. We found out, number one, Japanese pilots have no parachutes. Parachute weighs 40 pounds, something like that. Japanese planes had no armor plating protection like our planes had. Japanese planes had no self-sealing fuel tanks. They used all the fuel capacity to put fuel in, not to put fuel protective or leakage protective stuff in there, and so on. So again, a lot of things we learned there at that time. And the new war memorandum came out, which was distributed in the South Pacific, also came as a result of having the Zero, namely, never dogfight with a Japanese Zero, only make a pass at him from higher altitude. This was only when he had to fly low to escort his bombers, who were no damn good, but he had to accompany him, and so Americans had a chance to make a pass at the Zero, then dive away and come around, climb back again the other way and make another pass at him. Okay. Incidentally, during the rest of the war, the Japanese did improve the aircraft, but very, very little. They had lost all their good pilots in the first 2 years of the war, and from 1943, 44 on, it was really no more real battle against the Japanese Air Force. We had all the modern planes, we had the modern bombers, and then finally we had the nuclear bomb. Okay, now, I was supposed to speak about 1 hour, so we have another half hour. I'm just halfway through. That's exactly what happened. The war was over. I had gone to the United States. I had been transferred into the OSS. Some of you may have ever heard about that. That was the intelligence, what the CIA is today, was the OSS during the war. And there I met the commanding general, Wild Bill Donovan, who had passed away a few years ago, but just now a book was written about him. And he helped me. He said, "By God, we're going to make an officer out of you, and you don't have to go to China anymore, and whatever it takes, we'll do." Well, after 2-3 months in the United States, during which time I met my charming wife sitting there, which was the only good thing that really happened over here. But she was not my wife that time. I mean, she was wife after that, after the war. I asked for a return to China. I sent a telegram to General Chenoid to say, "Dear General, America is beautiful, but please get me back to China." So I came back to China, still a master sergeant, still an enemy alien, and in May of 45, I received a telegram from this young lady saying, very simple, bill introduced in Congress to make you citizen. Congratulations, Clarice. That was her name. And what indeed happened is that General Donovan pulled his rank and his influence, and Congress passed a special law that I, never having resided in the United States, became an American citizen. And I was told only 2 times altogether that was done. Once was Winston Churchill, and the second one was Gerhard Neumann. So I became a citizen, and when I came back after the war, I joined Douglas Aircraft Research in Santa Monica, California. There I worked on afterburners. Now you know what an afterburner is. A jet engine in front, then comes, if you want additional thrust for military plane to go supersonic, an afterburner. That was in those days the responsibility of the airplane builder. Now it is part of the engine builder because it really is integrated with the engine. Pratt & Whitney, General Electric, whoever else makes engines, Rolls-Royce, we all have afterburners following the engine as part of the engine builder's responsibility. Okay, and it was interesting, was fascinating. My girlfriend lived in Connecticut, but was usually overseas, either in South America or in Europe somewhere. And I was just doing well when I got a telegram from Shanghai, China, over the loudspeaker system of Douglas Aircraft from General Chenault, starting an airline, you want to come back. Like to have you as special project engineer. So he gave me a salary figure which was a multiple of what I made at Douglas, tax-free and everything, whole trip paid free. As a matter of fact, he asked me to be one of the crew members of 24 war surplus C-46s, big twin-engine transports he bought to fly from Hawaii over to China, which was illegal to fly a twin-engine propeller plane over the Pacific Ocean. But Chenault couldn't care less what was rule or not a rule. He bought 24 planes, put 24 crews together, and every day, day after day after day, one after the other planes left, and all 24 planes arrived safely in China after landing on Johnston Island and Guam, on Kwajalein and Manila, and Hong Kong or Canton, on Canton to Shanghai. Just before we left, my wife had returned, or my girlfriend had returned, and I told her, I'm going to China, and you said you like China, and everything you like of China, you have the first chance to see it now yourself. Go, let's get married, and we take right off. We got married, we looked telephone book, yellow pages on the beach in Santa Monica for a judge. For Saturday, he said, where are you kids? We said, we're at the beach. He said, well, you hurry up for another half an hour. Have you got a witness? I said, no, we don't have a witness. He said, okay, I'll bring my son along. So we got married. She went on a troop ship to Shanghai with our dog, which was born in Berlin, Germany, which she had brought along. I flew to Hawaii over all this hopping around, and I met her in Shanghai at the dock in 1947. Now I can tell you a long story, and I'll make it in 2 sentences or 3 sentences because we want to go to jet engines. The 3 sentences were when the communists came back there. By that time Japan was of course defeated. The communists came in, the communists from the north pushed us further south, further south. Finally the airline had to leave Shanghai, had to go to Canton to Hong Kong, from there to Taiwan. And at that point my wife said, I have enough of it. She said, I said I had enough of it. We both had enough of it. We started going home. How the hell are we going home? That time there was no regular airline service yet. That time there was no shipping service yet, unless you were with the military. And believe it or not, you're looking at the only man, and there sitting the only woman, who ever together with a dog in a Jeep drove from the Orient to the Mediterranean Sea without a map, except National Geographic, that big. That was Asia. Europe was a little bit hanging in the corner down there. We had no map, but there was a red line on that map. It says Genghis Khan made that trip. That's the truth. We had no idea where we get gasoline. We had no idea where we get food, where we go to sleep. All I knew is that it's get awfully cold in Afghanistan in winter. And so we left in October with Royal Air Force Jeeps. I bought 3 real Royal Air Force Jeeps, all put together because one had a good body, one had a good engine, one something else. We made a good engine out of it. And we drove 10,000 miles. We carried with us a great overload, 4-wheel drive, and I learned a lot which you could use too later. The four-wheel drive is great, but if you have that heavy loader like we had, like 52 gallons of gasoline, which means 10 jerry cans of gasoline and your own tank full, we're already 600-700 pounds right there, and winter clothes and summer clothes and snow chains and tools and everything. We had a range of about 1,000 miles. Well, I can tell you a lot about that trip, and I'm sure you would like to hear a lot about that trip. But I promised Dr. Coward we're going to do jet engines. I came back via Tehran. From Tehran on, there was no more challenge. There were roads again, at least marked roads, somewhere asphalt roads, going over the mountains, over into Iraq to Baghdad, from Baghdad to the Royal Kingdom of Jordan, Jordan to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, and from there back to the United States. We sold the Jeep to the American Potash Company in Jerusalem for the same money I paid for it in Hong Kong. And in Tehran, I wrote a letter to Pratt & Whitney and a letter to General Electric, who I know both of them make jet engines. I didn't know the rest of them. Both on the East Coast, and that I'm coming back in about 3 months, and I'm looking for a job, so and so and so. Pratt & Whitney never answered. General Electric didn't answer either. But I called General Electric. It happened to be the first to say, yes, you are the guy with the pretty stamps. Yes, I say, I know where with the pretty stamps. Well, we mailed your letter to Lynn, Massachusetts. Lynn, Massachusetts makes jet engines for GE. And you call them. I called them, they say, oh yeah, we're waiting for you, come right up. And we came right up the following day. They interviewed me and hired me on the spot. At that time it was $350 a month. I said, don't tell anyone. That's so much money, but don't tell anyone. And I started on test. And the best thing you can do when you leave here with your degree is to get into a company in a subject or which makes gadgetry, whatever you like, whether it's aircraft engines or airplanes or electronics, whatever it is, get on test. On test, you find out what goes haywire. And I was lucky that the big boss of the outfit here in Lynn, Massachusetts, knew a damn foreigner came in now, and he's here, and he has an interesting background, flying tigers and everything else. He made me report to him every morning at 8 o'clock sharp what went wrong in the past 24 hours on the jet engine development. In those days, we switched over from a centrifugal I-16 and I-40, which we copied from the British, into an axial flow engine, which we copied from the Germans. Just let's face it, no one says it in the book, but it's an exact copy of the engine which drove the Messerschmitt 262. It's a little longer compressor, but the same idea, longer combustion system, a little bit better, a little higher temperature, a little better turbine, all better materials because the Germans had no good material. Of course, they had to cool the hollow turbine buckets which operated at 1400 to 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is already glowing dark red if you do that. And they had to cool it in order to keep them together. We had better material. We had molybdenum. We had all kind of other things. And so we built the first engine, which was called the TG-180. Forget about the number. The next one was TG-190. We put in mass production. That was GE's number. The actual military number was J-47. We built 37,000 J-47 engines, just in time for the Korean War. Every F-86, which was now a jet plane, was powered by J-47. The B-47 bomber, 6 engines, all 6 J-47s, General Electric J-47s. B-36 bombers, which had 4 big Pratt & Whitney engines, which ran very well, were added in order to run a little better, with 4 GE jet engines, 2 on each wing tip. And so we were suddenly in the business till the Korean War was over. And the engines were kind of obsolete. The pressure ratio was 5-to-1 in about 12 stages, and that was the end of it. By that time, I had been transferred from the testing into running the research laboratory. Somebody picked me up and said, look, that darn thing is sitting here. It's the biggest in the world. Pratt & Whitney claims they're going to build a bigger one. We need something to test components like compressors, full scale, in the altitude, evacuated with big suction pumps to get the altitude up to 60,000 feet, 70,000 feet, up to 100,000 feet altitude, with air speeds at that time subsonic, not yet supersonic, but we all intended to go supersonic, of course, ultimately, so we ought to have supersonic capability. And altogether, it was a very fascinating job for compressors, turbines, and combustion systems. And I had a chance, since I now was in charge of the laboratory, following orders of the engineers with MIT degrees and whatever else they had done there, following orders what to do, but to carry it out. And I tell my wife, and she always laughs about it, it was more difficult to operate the research laboratory than the equipment I want to test. I tell you that right now. To run this massive equipment, cooled by 4,000 gallons of ocean waters per minute, which we suck in to cool the fresh water. And the fresh water circulating through exhaust and so on to cool the temperature down to minus 60, minus 70, and to dry the air. Otherwise, all the instruments get a little bit of snow on top down there and freeze up. And to do this, I could tell you a long story just running a laboratory. But in the process, as we try to get the pressure ratio, which all our theoretical people say, boy, if you could go to 10 to 1 instead of 5 to 1, or 12 to 1, boy, what we could do. And I looked at a compressor and I said, why the hell don't they rotate the first few stationary vanes, which are always ahead of a rotating one? Now, you all know, I assume, what it is. You have a stator vane, a row of stator vanes, and then a rotor. And then another stator vane, another rotor. Another stator vane, another rotor stage. All put together to build up pressure, which builds up on the negative side of the stator vane. And I say, well, if we rotate those, and as the speed goes up. Well, I got a patent for it, to make a long story short. Every engine you fly today has that variable stator system. 6 stages variable, some have 5 stages, some 4 stages, but I got a patent and suddenly I got a big name at General Electric. And the next thing what happened is that my boss called the big boss, the vice president of General Electric, and my secretary, our secretary, 12 of us had one secretary, said, the big boss wants to talk to you, and I thought she was kidding, I didn't want to go. And afterwards, I said, you damn well better go, I'm not kidding you. So I did go over shivering, and he said, sit down here. I sat down here and said, I understand you're bitching about our engines, that they are hard to maintain, they are not running as well as they should, you could do better. I said, yes, I made some comments. He said, okay, we're going to have a competition. Now remember that, another lesson. Competition, internally, don't wait for the outside. Internally, another team of whatever you design, how to design it differently. You'll find out the other guys have some good ideas too. And we had a competition with 2 teams, one variable status, like I had, one rotor, and another one put another rotor in front of the one rotor, so there were 2 different rotors, like the Pratt & Whitney engine now has. And since Pratt & Whitney already was running a dual rotor engine, we thought, well, hell, we'll be so far behind at that point, and the decision was made to go variable stator. Today, we have everything. We have, the whole world has now operating the Russians and Pratt & Whitney, variable status. And we added another rotor to the whole thing, like Pratt & Whitney did too. So we all have practically identical engines for supersonic flight and so on. So I got 8 patents on this one new engine, which was called J79. And again, we hit it just right, if you call it hitting it right, when the war was there, Vietnamese War, starting 62, 63, 64, 67, 69, 71, 72. Every Phantom fighter, 2 J79s. Every F-104 Starfighter, 1 J79. You can go down the line. 79s are all over. And they're NATO, the whole NATO air forces, all but England. England had Rolls-Royce engines. But everybody else, the Germans, the Danes, the Italians, everyone built J79 under license over there. This engine grew in pressure ratio up to 12 to 1 with a single rotor and variable status, which was, of course, a big progress right there. One single shaft, only 3 bearings, 1 in front, 1 in the middle, and 1 in the rear. Instead of 5 bearings and 7 bearings with bearing, each bearing, you know what a bearing is, right? A ball bearing or what a roller bearing. Each bearing needs seals, and needs lubrication system, it needs a scavenge system. It just sounds simple to put a bearing in. But you put a bearing in, which has lubrication oil constantly running through it, and scavenge it up, and seal the air from getting in and so on. You have a heck of a lot more difficult things to do than when you draw on a map here, is that a hurricane? Or is that no hurricane? I'm just saying it because Dr. Colbert was nice enough to show me of a few things he has planned to do with some of you fellows who are his students. The lesson learned there is talk with the people who use the engine, who use your product. I became a big shot at that time. I was a vice president of a company. I became in charge of a total division of the total aircraft business. We were 22,000 people at that time, going to 25,000 people, going up to 30,000 people, 32,000 people. Became a huge organization. And under me were another group of 6 vice presidents. And then we were other in levels, the typical 7-level organization. You know, I would never get the truth up, what's really going on, from the bottom to the top. It's impossible. You learn that. I hope you remember that. Now, I said it, and you bring it up again. Talk to people who use a machine, and talk to your service people who are out in the field, and talk to the manufacturing people what is difficult so that you get the real truths to it. And the only way to do it is I pulled out the servicemen and had them report to me directly. And I pulled out the quality control man and had them report to me directly. And I had 14 people report to me, including 1 professional SOB. Now, he was a Navy captain, retired. And I had him with me. He had a sour puss and he was a nasty guy. And I say, you know, Schmidt, the right thing for you is to be an SOB. I want you to take every decision, any one decision I want to make. And I were in a democratic organization. I had 51% of the vote. So there was no problem there. I said, you go over it, hostile, try to find a fault with it. Now, I often corrected what I wanted to do as a consequence of his talk. Something I didn't. I didn't have to do that. But I just want to tell you, if you ever have management, which you will have a generation from now when you're 40 years old and 45 years old, you'll run an organization and you'll have people. Remember that old bald guy down there who talked and told you to get quality customer service and visit the customer yourself. Talk to him on the phone if necessary. Call Norway, Norwegian Airline, SAS. Call the Tahitian Airways, which operates our engines today. Today, General Electric is the largest jet engine manufacturer in the world. We have 42,000 people, primarily my engines, which I designed in those days. It takes 20 years from the day you decide to build an engine, 10 years to get it to test and run it right, and another 10 years before you begin to make money. Because the first price you have to put on it, you're going to lose money on every engine. The more engine you sell, the more money you lose. And that then takes a while till it slowly comes up. The cost gets cheaper and cheaper and lower, and you find an easier way to make buckets. You don't machine them anymore, a turbine bucket. You cast them, which is much simpler, or you cast them within dimensions of about 20,000ths of an inch, and you get it down to where you really begin making money. Today, again at General Electric, it's no secret. You read the stock report if you own any GE stock. It is the most money-making group of General Electric products. Between refrigerators and freezers and light bulbs and General Motors, electric motors, and whatever it is, the jet engines make the most money. And of course, Pratt & Whitney now will be out to trying to catch General Electric again. Rolls-Royce is trying again. But I hope the people in my place whom I left behind will keep on feeling insecure. Last lesson. Feel insecure. Don't ever feel secure. Whether you ride a motorcycle, like I did to work, or whether you ski, or whether you design and think, well, or if you are Pratt & Whitney, they are hell, General Electric will never make it. I'm sure that's what they thought. I assume so. That's what they thought. But GE made it, because it takes a while in which they lost management, and they lost some good people, and good people retired. Pratt & Whitney lost a hell of a bunch of very, very good people who retired. I know that. And ours grew up. Now I hope that when we're growing up that we're going to stay real bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on top, but I'm not sure. But feel insecure. Don't ever think you have it made till you're on bed and sleep. I tell you that's one thing. You drive home on a motorcycle, a lady opens the car door, and you hit with the right side, you hit that open car door of a 2-door car, and boy, you're going right over the radiator. I got a big hole in my left leg, I tell you that. So a lot of things can happen, but just feel insecure. Now, it is exactly 3 minutes before 1 hour. Now, would you like to ask some questions, or any particular area would you like to hear?
Well, I think that, first of all, I would like to open the talk for questions, but I want to make 3 remarks first, if
right.
I may. The first remark is that when we talk to people about being engineers, we talk about having the effect of changing the way the world becomes. And I think our speaker today has taken part in that change. Transportation has changed, and I hope it never changed back to what it was. The second thing is I want to repeat the advice that he gave. That is, you got to get out and get among them. There is just no substitute for
Absolutely.
talking to the user. The guy with the skin knuckles, it's all different in the real world, and if you're going to work with equipment, you got to do that. The third is there is a book which is in the library. I'm told that the only language you can buy it in right now is Chinese or German. It's called Herman the German, and if you want to read about this trip from China to Tel Aviv, and I assure you that it's worth the effort to get it to read it. Now, we'll take a couple minutes for those of you that want to leave, that have carpools or whatever, and then with your permission, we'll have a few questions.
Delighted, delighted.
So anybody wants to go?
Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there questions? No, you can't get equal time.
Then may I make a comment, not based on your comments, but that you don't get a wrong impression that an engineer doesn't have to do engineering work. You are in the right profession. I think there's no more exciting job than an engineering job. And you do need the aerodynamic knowledge, and you need the mechanical strengths, but you also need specifications. That's one thing I forgot to say. Specifications, besides walking around, you've got to have good specs in there, specs which are reasonable, which are proper, like how much of a material strength shall you design to? 85%, 90%, 92%, or whatever the case. This is all very, very important. Later in the field, on the war, that poor soldier with a piece of a bullet going through the blades, that blade will break right off if it's designed to a limit like that. And there are many, many of these examples where a material fault, flaw, may be locally there, which normally wouldn't make a piece fail. But it failed because you designed it too close to the limit. So a good specification is worth a lot.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Why are all the big GE engines assembled at Evendale instead of Lynn?
Why we do it?
Why are they assembled in
Oh,
Evendale?
because it was so big. Evendale is a big plant, 2 miles long. We bought it from Curtiss Wright War Surplus and updated it. And the highway going by, in case you ever go there, is Newman Way. I don't know if you saw that. They named it after I was there. I didn't even know about it. They named that highway Newman Way. But it is for big engines. We're making small engines here, military and commercial, and big engines in Cincinnati. You go in an inlet of one of these big commercial engines down there. It's up to 8 feet. And we had won the engine for the supersonic transport, which President Kennedy wanted, and after he passed away, Congress canceled it right away. And I think it did the right thing, incidentally, at this point. But the engine was a huge engine with 70,000 pounds thrust in 1961. We ran it. We ran 35 engines, and so we had to do it in big facilities and big test cells and so on.
Okay. Any other questions?
All right, okay. All right, very briefly, I don't know. Does any of you know that we had a nuclear-powered aircraft engine running? Anyone know it? All right, so they are, okay, Clarice, now see, I'm surprised. In other places, they had known about it. I was put in charge of the mechanical design of that nuclear-powered engine in 1951. I had just been 3 years with General Electric. And not the nuclear part of it, but an engine which could run both on chemical fuel, on nuclear fuel, and on a mixture of both. So in other words, take off on regular fuel till you're up to altitude, then switch over to nuclear power, and that thing can fly 3 times around the world as long as there's food for the crew, if the engine lasts that long. But that's another matter. But anyhow, we got orders from the military to build a much bigger nuclear engine, and that was canceled in 1960 when aerial refueling became a standard technique.
All right. Any other questions?
Another question.
Yes.
Well, your status in China with the Flying Tigers, it seems to me that you did a switch of allegiance there. You started as a German, and it was kind of an in-between, whether you're
No,
or against the Japanese, but you ended up...
not at all. There were 3,000 German officers and men in China helping the Chinese against the Japanese right throughout the war.
What would your
But the Germans didn't like the Japanese. Actually, the people didn't like the Japanese.
He said if you had stayed in Germany,
Oh.
what would you have been doing in 19...
God knows what you're going to do. You'll be shot or not shot. I don't know. You never knew that, all right, yeah. Let me tell you this. Engineers, I was called up in the service on August 1, 1937, when they had a total draft coming in. All engineering students and all medical students were automatically deferred. They knew the war was coming. They needed all the engineers to build a massive thing. But look, if I may just say one more thing.
You can say as much more as you want.
No. In the 6 years.
You can keep talking till they leave.
In 6 years of Hitlerism, with all the horrible things he was able to produce an incredible amount of weaponry, from submarines to battleships to 88mm anti-aircraft to jet engines to everything else. And you have to give him credit. Now, he didn't do that himself. Matter of fact, a lot of people did it against his will. But he delayed the development of jet engines. I know that as a fact. I have a German book, which I gave in my last talk, I gave in Davenport, Iowa. And there someone gave me a thick German book about German fighter aircraft, how Hitler deliberately ordered the delay or the stopping of working on jet engines, on German jet engines, because it would water down the effort on the other things. Same as Pratt & Whitney and Curtiss Wright had been told not to work on jet engines during World War II, and they left it up to Westinghouse and General Electric, because we were the two electrical turbine manufacturers and familiar with it. But they didn't want to weaken the effort of Pratt & Whitney and General Electric. It was our good luck that has happened this way, but that's the way it went. Yeah.
Yeah, Carl.
Was there a competitive nuclear engine with Pratt Whitney, or was it a combined program?
No, it was a solely A&P aircraft nuclear propulsion program of General Electric. It was top secret. It was at the Evendale plant on the other end, completely fenced in and covered up. And
Pratt Whitney also had the same concept.
is that right?
Pratt Whitney, yes. I was the last
Well, see?
manager tantamount of that plant in Congress.
Well, you kept it secret, all right. I never heard about it. I think that's a sure thing. I never heard about it. I'm very glad. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, John.
Well, hi, anyhow. I'm glad to see you here. Oh, my goodness. The high bypass engine. All right, that was another thing. The British led the way there. They had an 8/10 bypass ratio engine. The one on the Conway, on a Conway. There was a Conway. And I built the first one, was 2.5 bypass ratio, and made an AFN out of it because the company wouldn't give me all the money I wanted. So they added it to the rear. I added it to the rear